Do it! Hurry up! The rancher went ahead, and then he regretted it. Jacob Miller was a hard-working rancher who lived on the edge of a quiet and dusty town called Red Valley. His ranch was not big or rich, but it was full of memories. The land had been in his family for many years. His father raised cattle there, and his grandfather had built the old wooden house that still stood near the barn. Jacob loved that place more than anything else in the world. But life had become very hard for him. The weather had not been kind for a long time. The rain had almost stopped coming, and the ground had turned dry and cracked. Grass that once grew green and tall now looked yellow and weak. The cattle were not as strong as before, and some days Jacob worried if he would even have enough feed for them. On top of that, money was becoming a serious problem. Bills were piling up. The bank had already sent him 2 warning letters. The workers who used to help him on the ranch had slowly left one by one because Jacob could not afford to pay them regularly anymore. Every morning, Jacob woke up early, looked at his land, and felt a heavy pressure in his chest. He tried his best to stay strong, but deep inside, he was tired and stressed. He had no one to turn to. He was alone in his struggle. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky was turning orange, Jacob was checking the fence near the barn when he heard the sound of horse hooves coming closer. It was unusual because not many visitors came to his ranch these days. He turned around and saw a stranger approaching. The man looked clean and well-dressed, wearing a dark coat and a hat that shaded his eyes. He was calm, confident, and carried himself like someone important. He stopped his horse near Jacob and stepped down slowly. "Are you Jacob Miller?" the man asked. Jacob nodded carefully, watching him with caution. The stranger smiled slightly. "I've heard about your ranch. Tough times, huh?" Jacob didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to strangers talking about his problems so openly. Still, he finally said, "Things have been better." The man looked around the dry land and nodded as if he understood everything without being told. "I can help you," the stranger said. Jacob raised his eyebrows. "Help me? How?" The man walked a few steps closer and spoke in a low, steady voice. "You don't have to lose this place. I have a solution. A fast one." Jacob felt a strange mix of hope and doubt. He had heard promises before, and most of them had not helped him. Still, something about this man's confidence made him listen. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "All you need to do is sign this. It will fix your problems quickly." Jacob looked at the paper, but did not touch it. "What exactly is this?" he asked. The man gave a small smile. "A simple agreement. It will bring money, support, and new opportunities, but you must act fast. Time is important." Then he leaned slightly closer and said the words that stayed in Jacob's mind. "Do it. Hurry up." Jacob felt his heart beat a little faster. He looked at his ranch, the dry fields, the tired barn, and the silent land. He thought about his debts. He thought about losing everything he had worked for. The pressure was heavy. The stranger stood quietly, waiting. No extra explanation, no clear details, just patience and silence. Jacob felt trapped between fear and hope. He wanted to ask more questions, but the stranger's calm confidence made him feel like time was running out. The wind blew softly across the empty land. In that moment, Jacob did not know that this single decision could change his entire life, and he stood there, still thinking, while the stranger kept repeating in his mind, "Do it! Hurry up!" Jacob Miller stood in front of the stranger, holding the weight of too many thoughts in his mind. The dry wind moved slowly across the ranch, making the wooden barn creak softly in the background. The stranger still held the folded document in his hand, waiting patiently, as if he already knew what Jacob would decide. Jacob was not a careless man. He had always believed in working hard and thinking carefully before making any choice. But these days were different. Stress had changed him. Every bill, every empty field, and every silent morning was pushing him closer to breaking point. He looked at the paper again. "What kind of agreement is this?" Jacob asked, trying to stay calm. The stranger gave a soft smile. "It's simple. You sign it, and your problems start disappearing. Money will come. Your ranch will be supported again. You will not have to worry anymore." Jacob frowned. "Nothing is that simple." The stranger nodded slowly. "Maybe not for everyone. But for you, it can be. You just have to trust the process." Trust. That word felt heavy in Jacob's mind. Trust had been something he had lost slowly over the past year. People had promised him help before, but most had walked away when things got difficult. Still, this man felt different, calm, controlled, confident, and Jacob was tired. He walked a few steps toward the barn, looking at his land again. The cattle were quiet, the grass was thin, the fences needed repair. Everything around him looked like it was falling apart. He thought about the bank warning letters again. He thought about how many nights he had spent worrying instead of sleeping. He thought about how alone he felt. Behind him, the stranger spoke again. "Do it! Hurry up!" The words were not loud, but they carried weight. They pressed into Jacob's mind like a constant push. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment. He was not thinking clearly anymore. He was only feeling pressure to fix everything quickly. He walked back slowly and stopped in front of the stranger. "If I sign this," Jacob said, "you promise things will get better?" The stranger nodded without hesitation. "Yes, you will see change very soon." Jacob hesitated one last time. Something deep inside him still warned him to stop, to think, to wait. But that small voice was weak compared to everything else he was feeling. He reached out and took the document. The paper felt strangely cold in his hands. The stranger handed him a pen. Jacob looked down at the page. The writing was small and full of legal words he did not fully understand. His eyes moved quickly across the lines, but his tired mind could not focus properly. "Just sign where marked," the stranger said gently. Jacob's hand trembled slightly. He paused again. The wind grew a little stronger, moving dust across the yard. The old windmill creaked slowly in the distance. Everything around him felt like it was waiting for this moment. Finally, Jacob exhaled deeply, and he signed. The moment the pen left the paper, something inside him felt both relieved and uneasy at the same time. The stranger immediately took the document back and folded it carefully. A faint smile appeared on his face, but it was not warm. It was controlled, like someone who had completed a task. "Good choice," the stranger said. Jacob tried to read his expression, but it was hard to understand. "What happens now?" Jacob asked. The stranger turned back toward his horse. "Now, things begin." He mounted the horse slowly and adjusted his hat. Before leaving, he looked back once. "Remember," he said, "don't overthink it now. Just let it happen." Then he rode away. Jacob stood there watching him disappear into the dusty road. The silence returned quickly, but it did not feel normal anymore. It felt heavier than before. At first, nothing seemed to change. Jacob told himself he had done the right thing. Maybe help would come soon. Maybe this was the answer he had been waiting for. That night he tried to sleep early, hoping for a better tomorrow. But sleep did not come easily. His mind kept replaying the moment he signed the paper. The stranger's calm voice, the strange confidence, the words, "Do it, hurry up." He turned in bed many times, feeling uneasy without knowing why. Outside, the wind moved across the empty ranch. The barn doors creaked softly again. And far away in the darkness, something had already started changing, slowly, quietly, and in a way Jacob did not yet understand. The next morning in Red Valley started like any other day, but Jacob Miller did not feel the same as before. He woke up early, as usual, but something inside him felt heavy and unsettled. The ranch was quiet, but it was not the peaceful kind of quiet he was used to. It felt different, like the air itself was holding a secret. Jacob stepped outside his wooden house and looked across his land. The sun was rising slowly, spreading soft light over the dry fields. The cattle were moving slowly near the fence, and the old barn stood still as always. At first glance, everything looked normal, but Jacob knew something had changed. He kept thinking about the stranger and the document he had signed. He told himself not to worry too much, but his mind refused to stay calm. He walked toward the barn, checking the fence like he did every morning, but his focus was not on repair work today. It was on the feeling in his chest. A few hours later, a wagon arrived at the edge of his property. Jacob noticed it immediately. Two men stepped down, both wearing clean clothes and carrying clipboards. They did not look like ranch workers. They looked like they had come for business. Jacob walked toward them. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. One of the men looked at his papers and replied, "We are here for inspection and land evaluation." Jacob frowned. "Inspection? I didn't call anyone." The man checked his notes again. "This is scheduled under a recent agreement." Jacob felt his heart tighten. "What agreement?" The man paused for a moment, then continued, "Mr. Miller, according to records, certain rights of this land have been transferred." For a second, Jacob could not speak. The words did not make sense at first. He felt like the ground beneath him had become unstable. "Transferred?" he repeated slowly. "What are you talking about?" The second man pointed at the document. "You signed a legal agreement yesterday. It gives authority for land review and development planning." Jacob's mind went blank. He remembered everything clearly now. The stranger, the fast talking, the pressure, the words, "Do it, hurry up," and the signature he gave without fully understanding. His stomach tightened. I thought it was just help," Jacob said quietly. The first man looked at him without emotion. The terms were in the document. Jacob took a step back, trying to process what he was hearing. But I didn't know everything in it. It was explained too fast. The men did not argue. They simply continued writing notes as if it was a normal procedure. After a few minutes, they packed their things and left, saying more teams would arrive soon. Jacob stood alone again. The wind moved gently across the ranch, but now it felt cold instead of calming. He looked at his land, the place he had cared for all his life, and something inside him started to break, not loudly, but slowly. He walked back to his house and sat down heavily. For a long time, he just stared at the floor. That evening, Jacob tried to find answers. He visited the small-town office, asked questions, and showed copies of what he could find, but no one gave him clear help. They only repeated that the agreement was legal. Legal. That word hurt more than anything. When he returned home, the ranch felt even quieter than before. Even the cattle seemed distant, as if sensing his mood. Days passed, and more changes began to appear. New people came to measure parts of the land. Stakes were placed near the fields. Conversations happened that Jacob was not included in. Slowly, he realized that decisions about his own ranch were being made without him. One evening, as the sun set again, Jacob stood near the barn and looked at the horizon. He finally understood the truth. He had not been helped. He had been rushed. And in that rush, he had given away something he never meant to lose. The stranger had never forced him. There were no threats, no arguments, only calm words and pressure disguised as urgency. Jacob closed his eyes. He remembered it clearly now, how easily he had been pushed into acting fast when he should have slowed down. For the first time since signing the paper, he felt real regret. Not anger, not confusion, just regret. The ranch was still there, but it no longer felt fully his. And as the wind moved across the empty land, Jacob realized that fixing this mistake would not be easy. But he also knew one more thing: he could not give up yet. The days after the truth came out were the hardest days of Jacob Miller's life. His ranch, once full of peace and purpose, now felt like a place of uncertainty. Every morning he woke up with the same thought: he had made a mistake, and that mistake was slowly taking his land away from him. But Jacob was not someone who gave up easily. Even though he felt regret, he still cared deeply for his ranch. He still walked the fields every day, checked the fences, and looked after the cattle. He told himself that as long as he was still standing on his land, there was hope. One afternoon, while Jacob was repairing a broken fence near the barn, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned and saw a woman walking toward him. She looked calm, confident, and familiar in a way he could not explain at first. It took him a moment, but then he recognized her. Her name was Sarah Collins. She had grown up in Red Valley but had left years ago to study law in the city. Jacob had known her family for a long time, but he had not seen her in many years. "Jacob Miller?" she called out. "Yes," Jacob replied, wiping dust from his hands. Sarah came closer and looked around the ranch. "I heard something about your land situation. People in town are talking." Jacob sighed. He was tired of explaining everything again, but something in Sarah's expression made him feel she was different from the others. "I made a mistake," Jacob said honestly. "I signed something without understanding it fully." Sarah nodded slowly. "I heard that too. Can I see the document?" Jacob hesitated for a moment, then went inside and brought out a copy of the papers he had kept. He handed them to her carefully. Sarah read quietly. Her eyes moved across the pages with focus. The wind moved gently around them, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Finally, she looked up. "This is not as simple as it looks," she said. Jacob felt a small spark of hope. "What do you mean?" Sarah pointed at certain lines in the agreement. "There are unclear terms here. Some parts are not properly explained. And this clause, it may have been rushed or hidden in legal language." Jacob leaned forward. "So, what does that mean for me?" Sarah closed the document. "It means there might be a way to challenge it." For the first time in many days, Jacob felt something lighter inside his chest. Not full relief, but hope. "Can it really be fixed?" he asked. Sarah did not give a false promise. She spoke honestly. "It won't be easy, but yes, there is a chance." Over the next few days, Sarah started helping Jacob. She studied the agreement carefully, checked records, and spoke with people in town offices. Jacob watched everything closely, learning how deeply he had been misled by the stranger. He also learned something important. He had not been completely powerless. He had simply trusted too quickly when he was under pressure. One evening, Sarah came back to the ranch with new information. "I found something," she said. Jacob stood up immediately. "What is it?" "There are signs that the agreement was presented under unfair conditions. The urgency, the lack of explanation, and how quickly it was signed. All of it can be questioned. Jacob listened carefully. Sarah continued, "We can request a review. If the review agrees, parts of the agreement could be reversed." Jacob felt his heart beat faster. "So, I might get my ranch back?" Sarah gave a small, honest smile. "There is a real chance." For Jacob, that was enough. The following weeks were filled with effort and patience. Papers were submitted, meetings were held, questions were asked. Jacob stayed strong even when things moved slowly. He learned to wait, to think, and to trust carefully instead of rushing. During this time, Jacob also changed. He became more careful with decisions. He stopped letting pressure control him. The memory of the stranger's words, "Do it, hurry up," now reminded him to slow down instead of rush. Finally, after many long days, the decision came. The review board agreed that the agreement had not been properly explained and had been signed under rushed conditions. Parts of it were officially canceled, and Jacob's ownership rights were restored. When Jacob heard the news, he stood quietly for a long time. He did not shout or celebrate immediately. He simply looked around his ranch. The land was still the same. The sky was still wide. The wind still moved through the fields. But now it felt different. It felt like it belonged to him again. Sarah stood beside him and said softly, "You did not just win your land back. You learned something important." Jacob nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "Never rush when your whole life is on the line." As the sun set over Red Valley, Jacob walked across his ranch with steady steps. The mistakes of the past were still part of his memory, but they no longer controlled him. He had lost peace once by rushing, and he had found it again by learning patience.